JavaScript is a weird language. I don't think I have to convince any of you of that. We've all written it, we've all seen it, we know how strange it is, but it is a language that's evolving and improving. What if the path to evolve and improve it faster was to split it into two? And no, I'm not talking about TypeScript versus JavaScript. I'm talking about a new proposal that's really interesting, and it could change, potentially even break the web forever. We're talking about JS Sugar and JS0, the new proposed way to split JavaScript in half, deferring some parts to tooling authors like Babel and compilers, and the other part to the browsers themselves. This is an interesting one, and the drama's already started. I want to dive into all of this with you guys and make sure you understand this proposal, all the other crazy things that happened at TC39, and what the future of JavaScript might be. If you haven't already seen it, TC39 is the meeting where all the new JS standard stuff gets talked about. A ton of things were proposed. Keep an eye out. I have a video covering all of those coming soon. This all started when Nullvox Populi started reporting on this proposal. He's a legend from the Ember community that's deep in the JavaScript standard stuff. RIP Vanilla.js. And that's what's really scary with this proposal. They're effectively saying that build tools will be required going forward if we want to do more. If we want to have features in JavaScript that are reasonable as developers, that those features won't be part of the engines anymore, those will be part of the build tools that we use. Oh boy. I can't wait to dive in more, but first we need to have a quick word from our sponsor. Me. We're doing a lot more of these breaking news videos, and as much as I love the current sponsors, believe me, I do, not all of them are down to get these really quick turnaround times. So if you're okay with not approving a script way ahead and getting a discounted rate in order to get into these breaking news videos, hit me up. YouTube at t3.gg. Anyways, why require build tooling? Authors directly for runtime models is outdated and no longer borne out by data. The state of JS development today already requires tooling to be productive and competitive. No evidence suggesting that tooling use would decrease in the future. There's already aspects of web dev that preclude frictionless direct authoring, secure context requiring local HTTP servers, interesting call out. And direct authoring can be recovered during development at high performance costs, like what CoffeeScript does. Interesting. Let's just read through this thread because Nullvox is a legend. And if he doesn't like this, and I don't like this, and Brandon Ike doesn't like this, and Canada Honk doesn't like this too, there's enough people disagreeing with this. And I'm guessing if DHH hasn't seen this yet, when he does, he's going to hate it too, because no build. Whew boy. The TLDR, before we go any further, just to make sure it's very, very clear, is that new features in JS will not be part of JavaScript itself or JavaScript engines. They will be things built on top as a standard syntax that build tools will handle for you. So if you look at an example like this, error.isError, this is a new standard, hopefully coming very soon. They provide a polyfill, which is code you can load to be able to use this syntax ahead of time. A lot of these new standards are able to do that via build tools compiling in the right syntax, via having these polyfills that you load in order to get it early. There's a lot of these things that JavaScript allows. But right now, it's just ways to get these features early. It's not alternatives to JavaScript itself implementing the features. The argument being made by this proposal, the JS Sugar proposal, is that those types of features should just never be part of the JavaScript engines, and build tools should always be the way we handle them. They might still be part of the standard, but the argument is the standard should be separate from the expected implementation that browsers have. So you can have JS features that aren't supported by the engine with the expectation that build tools and polyfills will implement those features for you on top. Kind of chaotic. Let's dive in. This is straight from the slides, which, by the way, they have all of here. You know what? Let's go through the slides quick first, and then we'll cover Nullvox's response. Interesting art choices. The thing that they're specifying here is that we have this weird path where TypeScript and JavaScript have features. We then put it through build tools like the TypeScript compiler, Babel, Webpack, that result in JavaScript coming out that then has to run in the browsers and other engines to work for the users. So despite the fact that we have these two layers, we have the layer that turns our TypeScript code into standard JS, and then we have a layer that turns a standard JS into code your computer can execute in order for users to see the results. That separation is the thing they are calling out. If we have this part anyways, if we have these build tools on the left here, why do we also have to implement all these things here if they could just be implemented here instead? That's the argument. JS is special, outsized everything. It's used by tens of millions of developers, billions of users of software written in JS, and many maintained independent implementations. And that's the key. There's all of these different things that run JS, and as new features are added, their jobs get harder, especially with things like those new memory proposals we just saw. Imagine implementing those for every single browser. It's going to be a while before they all support it. And as more and more of these standards are introduced, it is more and more difficult to maintain all of them, and it's basically impossible for new engines to come out because you have to support everything. These slides are chaos. We evolved the language to help developers. We want to help developers to be more productive by better matching their mental models, like functional programming, OOP type systems, enabling them to more simply express new domains like machine learning, finance, scientific computing, internationalization, enable them to build new classes of apps with new capabilities, like weak references and shared memory, letting them use new interfaces entirely like WASM, reifying common programming patterns that they use, and simplifying their lives by removing dependencies and build tools. And this is the part they're throwing away now. So how do we help devs? By abstracting away complexity, by introducing new abilities, and by explicitly coordinating, I don't know what they mean by that, by explicit coordination point, as being the place where everybody follows, I suppose. It's like having the one standard that everyone implements makes it better for developers to move their tools around. Abstracting away complexity moves it, not removes it. Complexity is moved from tooling and developer code to language implementations. That's fair. If they add, like, let's say they add type safety to JavaScript standards. Right now, the complexity lives in the TypeScript compiler. This would move the complexity over to the browser standard implementations, which makes their lives harder. And effectively, what this is doing is, in their minds, offloading complexity that currently lives in dev tools over to the browsers instead. What about the users? Very interesting. It seems like their angle is users aren't getting any of the benefits from a lot of these new language things. What do users want? They want security, they want performance, stability, and features. And end users are the implementation's primary customer. When new features are added to the browser, the developer is not the one they're trying to serve, it's the users. And the argument here is that the browser should be more focused on what the users want, and developer tools should focus on what developers want. It's an interesting argument. It sounds logically sane, but we're going to go through all the reasons why I don't agree with it at all. And new language features are more likely to have a negative impact on security, performance neutral to negative, stability often sometimes negative as well, but app features can be positively impacted as long as the devs are using these new features, and those features do make things easier, other than web components. But yeah, apparently some of these severe issues that have existed in V8 came from new features like big ints, class scopes, built-in promise subclassing, optimizing for super, resizable buffers, weak refs, logical assignments, and top-level awaits have all caused severe security issues in Chrome and in V8. To show that I'm a serious man, the vulnerabilities above are all set in Arial. That's kind of hilarious. This is despite state-of-the-art security engineering with fuzzing, bounty programs, security reviews, etc. VMs are very complex because of the pressure to be fast, and complexity cross-cuts all of security. And when these big features don't get adoption, like species or big ints, it sucks because it was hard to implement them in a safe way, and now no one uses them. Speaking of performance. New features have guardrails that can't be optimized away, like let and const. Design inherently slow for network, like ESMs. Like ESMs have the potential to be really bad for networking. It's weird to see it called out here, but it's a real problem. Also, too many allocations that are hard to glide, like the iterator proposal. That's really hard to get in a way that's performant and works everywhere. Stability is also an important detail. They're overall good with backwards compatibility. Things that used to work will continue to work. Enterprises will freeze browser versions, and apps that target latest baseline may stop working on enterprise. That's nullish coalescence broke things in Firefox. I will say enterprises freezing browser versions is terrible because of security updates, and they should not do that. And we should not be building for a web where browsers might be on ancient versions because a corporation or an enterprise is doing things wrong. That's probably the single point thus far that I have agreed with the least. The enterprises should be forced for security reasons to stay up to fucking date. That is terrifying. Like genuinely so. New language features should help devs be more productive so they can ship more new features for their users. But native adoption of features is lackluster or sometimes not even worth it. Performance regressions, use cases, lack of incentive. Specifically, we still transpile everything. It's so common. I know that Prime mentioned this in a video recently. So many apps will just transpile in basic functionality that's been in the browser for like 8 to 10 years. Like so many things compile for like ES4 or ES5 instead of the more modern standards. Even though you're using all the new code, it'll just compile out like the polyfills for everything, which is weird because we should be taking advantage of it being in the browser. Good old core JS, yeah. Are these negatives to the users offset by benefits to devs? The statement here is no. Cost to users in aggregate. Complexity belongs at the edge. JS runtimes are used by billions, which means a security flaw has wide implications. User bases of each app are much, much smaller for vast majority of apps. Exceptions being WordPress, Facebook, and Google. So, Complexity costs and runtime as a storage, memory, and performance cost to every user regardless of adoption. Yeah, but how often is that cost being eaten? Goals, intention. Helping devs be more productive, doing right by users. They're claiming that these are not goals that are aligned. Where I think we are today and where he thinks we should go. So the big proposal here is we need to change how we introduce new features. Engines are going to be more conservative with new language features as they pursue security, performance, and stability for users. They're not proposing a new process or demotions. They're not proposing a new process or not saying that they demote any features currently being proposed. It's about the future. Taxonomy of new language features. Syntax, APIs, and capabilities. Syntax is a thing that can be represented as an API, like big decimal. Syntax that is or can be represented by an API, but wouldn't benefit from a different textual representation, like pipeline. Or syntax where the textual representation enables its functions, like immutable data structures, like records and tuple syntaxes. These are different types of syntax, some of which could be done via compiler and polyfill, some of which need to be in the browser itself. Also, language distance. Does it require static compilation or is it more dynamic? Some syntax additions fit without the issue into a language which is dynamically typed and interpreted, but some syntax features make more sense to rely on type information or on a compile step. Interesting. APIs are split into built-ins and new built-ins. Built-ins expanding capabilities of existing browsers and allow additional capabilities for existing methods, like subtypes of existing built-ins for objects. New capabilities. Exposing host systems. So if the browser's adding things like float or access to video things, or in the future, if there's like a locally running model you can use, those types of things would be exposed here. That would still have to be built into the browser. Also parallelism, weak refs, all of these things. Makes sense. And then new capabilities. Opportunity cost of not adding new capabilities is large because the alternative is you can't do it. This is where most of the risk appetite is for implementers. Engines being conservative does not mean that we have to stop evolving the language. So the proposal is that for syntax features, we should have a new category that we'll call JS Sugar. Trying to find it. He calls out that devs have embraced tooling, saying TypeScript, Babel, all of these things are being used by the majority of web devs. Tools exist and are widely adopted. Let's use that fact for a win-win. Standardized JS as the ecosystem uses it, which is JS0, the language implemented by the engines, and then JS Sugar, which is features that must be compiled by tools to be JS0. So for the future of dev, JS would be JS0, the browser thing, plus JS Sugar, what we're actually writing. Interesting. So now TypeScript, JS Sugar, and JS0 are compiled into just JS0, which gets run in the browsers instead. Future syntax features could be spec'd as desugarings in JS Sugar. So it starts at JS Sugar and can be moved in if it makes more sense to. And runtimes count as implementers for JS0 features, but there is still one standard. Browsers and engines support JS0. Tools support a down-leveling of JS Sugar to JS. It's not a proposal for tools to do non-standard extensions. This is still like they have to implement the JS Sugar set of things. Oh boy. This is going to be fun. Let's dive into the thread here. The presentation was by Google, Mozilla, Apple, Audible, and Sony. Interesting set of people. Argue that we evolved the language to help devs and the users are suffering as a result. Proving the language moves complexity, yeah. Everyone should consider their users as their primary customer. I agree. It's only going to make dev useful features for users harder if we make it cumbersome for app devs to work on these features, delaying or splitting up complex behaviors. Unless you have a big user base, the cost is too high. Slide deck is regularly complaining about async generators, big ints, and ESMs. Interesting. It claims async generators aren't used commonly, but they are very common in Node. And I think this is another problem is that like the things Node needs and the things the browser need are separated enough, which is rough. Oh boy. I think this is silly because for ESM, there's another proposal that makes ESM bundling possible basically via concatenating files. That's cool. I didn't know about that. Yeah, regenerator is ancient. We should not still be using this to make things work in ancient versions of web tooling. Like, come on. Like, we don't need that on everything. And this is, I call it the same thing, like pretending that helping devs and doing right by users is a spectrum, not 2 points with our goals is kind of pathetic. So many things I see going through the TC39 process would free me up to multiply my velocity. I agree. Apparently the syntax features proposal is what Google's preferred solution is, but not necessarily the other implementers. Good to know that call out. I missed that initially. They want build tools to prove out these features before building them themselves, which is already happening, but it seems like an excuse to defer work even longer, which I agree. Like that's why we have stage 3 for this reason. The proposal has been recommended for implementation. No changes to the proposal are expected, but some necessary changes may still occur due to web incompatibilities or feedback from production grade implementers. That's the point of stage 3 is it's been approved, tools can start implementing it, and if browsers see problems as they implement it too, we can adjust the standard. That's the point. This isn't a difference in the language. It's a difference in whether or not, like where these proposals advance. Like, that's the point of the standard. Are they wanting a 3.7 stage like 2.7? That's a weird screenshot. The 2.7 standard is like, we're very close to implementation. The committees agreed, but things might change as we start implementing it. They propose this as a win-win, but I feel like some communication boundaries fallen apart and we need to get better at communicating with implementers. In particular, as example, JS VM teams poorly staffed for DevRel and listening to broad spectrum dev feedback, but are good compiler authors. Yeah, but let's not have JS VM teams poorly staffed for any position. I agree. Like people on V8, there should be people on V8 talking to the community. That's really important. But the big thing here is build tooling required, which would effectively kill vanilla JS. Like, this is also a weird thing, like saying this is an opportunity to make source maps better. That should be done anyways, regardless of if they make JS 2 languages. This is a fair point, and I agree. Most things that people are proposing would have measurable impacts for their users. I can also see the argument that engine implementers may not think the impact is to enough users to make the implementation time worth it. Essentially, we'd all be relying more on baseline, as different implementers could have vastly different JavaScripts. If the process started in 2013, I could see features of ES6 not existing in some implementations even today. Maybe baseline would be insufficient though, because what happens when an implementer doesn't ever want to implement a feature and that feature is widely used? Do bigger companies need to pay the engines to get features implemented? Is there a future where apps ship their own runtimes with something like WASM? I have no clue. If anyone does, it'd be super helpful to hear your thoughts. So if you guys aren't familiar with Brendan Eich, he's the creator of JavaScript, and I love this call out from him. Implementers should not be calling the shots. Almost none of them have any real web dev experience. If you haven't watched my video about web components, I go in depth on this. The browser engine teams just don't really understand how people build JS every day. On one hand, that kind of makes the proposal make more sense because they're like, we don't get this. Let the tooling people figure it out. But on the other hand, it means that them making decisions around what does and doesn't get implemented has potential really negative impacts on the web as a whole. This is a point because people keep saying the WebAssembly thing. WebAssembly in no way replaces, on any foreseeable basis, JS as an extension and glue polyfill language needed to compensate for inevitable and ongoing HTML and CSS gaps and bugs. Even a tool-only dystopia doesn't solve this. Blindness to evolutionary dynamics is fatal. Bold, but real. He calls out that there are implementers that are pushing features to only be part of WASM and not actually building them into JS. The example was SIMD, which I should probably know what this is. A single instruction, multiple data, which is a way to control large amounts of data for like game engines and such. They're only allowing those APIs to work in WASM, not inside of JS. Ike wanted it in JS and is surprised that it was restricted to WASM. This is already starting to happen, and that is somewhat terrifying. I do like Malta here, who, if you're not familiar, CTO of Vercel and a person really involved in Google standards way back when he worked at Google. He calls out that this is essentially the opposite of the web component strategy, which is that we should have frameworks like TypeScript add complexity without making the platform too complex, which web components absolutely did. Malta thinks this is a good direction. I have concerns. I have a lot of concerns. This is from Canada Honk. Huge shout out to them for helping me organize all of this. They call out here the proposed problem, which is that adding language implementation level complexity is bad for users and implementers. New language features are too focused on helping devs and not doing right by users. Their proposed solution is that the language should be split with Sugar and JS0, as mentioned before. They also call out this proposed with good intentions. Browser JS engines like V8 want to reduce the amount of new features they implement for the reasons stated above. So they propose this as a solution to ensure the language continues to evolve. With JS Sugar, that implementation would move to tools like Babel instead of engines. The problem with the proposed solution. JS tooling does not have the resources to deal with this. Tooling today is already at an unstable ecosystem, constantly changing entire tool chains like Babel to SWC to OXC, who knows what's next. Imagine each of these tool chains not only have to deal with everything currently happening, but also new tool-only proposals and more than there were before. The one counterpoint that's valuable here is that tools are often implementing some of these unstable features like decorators, which this is implicitly kicked off by, so they do have some resources. Not enough, but some. That said, we're currently in the process of rewriting all of these tools to be faster and in Rust. And if we have to also implement new features in parallel, that will slow down that transition significantly. It's also worth noting there's a lot of tech debt in these older tools like Babel because they implemented things that the browser eventually implemented that are still sitting in here that should be dead long ago. JS Sugar features can be less stable, but this is also an advantage to more easily fix mistakes. This is countered with the fact that we have a staging process for TC39, which ensures stability of new features. Introducing a new form of implementation designed to undermine this would be counter to what ECMAScript stands for. The proposed faster implementation iteration can easily leave some devs behind with tools hiding unfixed mistakes. Very real. Like, what happens if you can't upgrade to the new version of Webpack or Babel? Do you just never get to use any of these new JS features ever? And if more of these features are being implemented in those tools, it's going to be even harder to move to the new things. The idea seems to fundamentally misunderstand how devs use these tools below the surface. Versioning, plugins, and all the effort that goes into simply using them. Do devs expect these tools today to implement JS features? Developers already are largely moving away from less standard tool-only features like TypeScript's enum. This is a good call out too. There are features in TypeScript that aren't in the browser that we're realizing suck and we're moving away from. There's features that TypeScript added first, like they added nullish coalescing and optional chaining a little before browsers did, but now it's everywhere. What if the feature sucks? Now it can get further in the JS Sugar proposal process where before it would have been killed. And now we have these weird features floating around, which is weird because now we have to relearn the JS standardizing, but some features are tool only due to reasons beyond their knowledge. And that's particularly weird. You might have some syntax that you're used to using in your editor that you go to the browser and you type it in the console and it just doesn't work there. This is a thing that all JS devs are going to have to understand. This separation is now you have to know the two languages. You have to know the JS you're writing and the JS that's actually being run. Imagine if we had to understand the bytecode that came out of V8. If you ran JavaScript and that turns into bytecode, imagine having to understand that bytecode. And imagine that you have to use that bytecode if you want to do things like log in the browser. This is that, but within JS, which is kind of scary. I like the call out here that JS Sugar will only harm DX no matter the details. This undeniably makes JS more complex for devs. Google may think that this is only describing the current reality, but it's fundamentally untrue. This ignores server-side or treats it as a tool like Babel. In this JS Sugar world, Node, Dino, and Bun will have to implement JS features instead of V8 and JSC and other runtimes. How is that fair? Yeah. It's weird to think all of these things like Node, Dino, and Bun would have to build all of these new features themselves. Genuinely terrifying. Oh, God. It's easy to support this, but it is tough to meaningfully, constructively critique it. I noticed that as I was reading, like a lot of this sounds like a good idea, but the damage this would do to the ecosystem is rough. And I like the call out here that Canada Honk feels that implementers are becoming complacent with tools, and now they see some proposals as not worth their effort, and instead those should be the problem of the tool developers instead. If they can code gen solutions or polyfill them, why does the browser have to do it? They don't see the benefit of their effort, so they view it as useless to work on. I guess their core argument is that new features which do not make things previously impossible possible are useless for end users, and they are not providing an actual visible impact to the user. True and painful. Nicole, please come back. Google needs you. I thought going in that it would be harder to understand the implementer side. I also thought going in that I wouldn't feel quite this strongly, but it's clear this would fundamentally change how working with JavaScript behaves for all of us. And I don't think that change should be made without clear, concise, focused wins, none of which were presented here. If we saw all those security issues happening in the browsers from implementing new JS things, how much more are we going to see those in random tools implementing it instead? It's hard for me to see a future where these things actually benefit both developers and users. Even the developers of the browser are just offloading all of these problems to other people. And while I understand they feel like they have to do too much work to implement all these things, that does suck. We should offer more sympathies and ideally more help to V8, to all these other places that have to implement this stuff. But at the same time, it's important to not offload all of the things you're scared of to other people who are not equipped to do it. This is a tough one, and I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know in the comments if I'm off base, if JS0 and Sugar is a good separation, or if you're petrified of a future where these things happen. Until next time, peace, nerds.